Well, welcome to a special Christmas Eve service. And today we're going to look at the real Christmas story. And this is going to be quite different from anything else you've ever heard before. And as we get into this today, I want you to consider the evidence that is in your own Bible and how we have been told a story that is very different from the words of Jesus. And so we're going to explore some of that here today as we unpack the real Christmas story. So we're going to go through some of these things here, and we're going to spend some time just talking about some different things to do with Jesus' sacrifice and actually coming here and how big of a deal this really is. And what I would say is that the story that I'm telling is more impactful, more important than the Christianity story. And I think that, well, let's look at this post here that I made on Twitter. I copied and pasted it here. So let's read this and we'll kind of see. This was posted last night and maybe you've seen it already. And I think when you reframe the Christmas story into what's actually going on, you'll see that the story that we've been told is like a child's cover story. It doesn't go into the details on why Jesus came, and it doesn't have the depth of what we're about to look at today. So let's read this. The traditional Christianity narrative describes a domestic transaction where a son satisfies his father's internal debt. This frames the cross as a scripted ritual. When you ask a Christian, why did Jesus come and have to die on a cross, you'll get explanations like, well, he came to cleanse your sin, forgive your sin. While those things are accurate, there's a lot more going on than just that. And as we go through, we'll start to see that. The whistleblower perspective reveals a much higher price and a far more sophisticated mission. Jesus did not merely fulfill a holy requirement. He executed a tactical infiltration into a hostile legal system run by a rebellious entity. By voluntarily submitting to a rigged law designed for human entrapment, he allowed the system to overreach and execute an innocent man. This act exposed the architect as a murderer and used the enemy's own legal machinery to execute the contract for humanity, setting us legally free. And free from what? Or free from whom? This transforms Jesus from a compliant victim into a master liberator who outmaneuvered a tyrant on his own turf. It replaces a passive religious tragedy with a high-stakes rescue mission where love is proven by the grit required to enter a cage in order to break the lock. So you come into a religious system, you submit yourself fully to that religious system in order to break everybody free from that religious system. What Jesus did for us is difficult to accept. He chose us over his own kind. He went to war with his own brother, with one of his own, because he preferred us. Now, that's quite a big deal. He debased himself before his enemy, for us, for you. The sacrifice Jesus made for you is so much greater than Christianity can even begin to tell you. When you look at this, when you kind of factor in the Christianity idea that we started with here. Well, God sent his son to die to fulfill his law, and to do what? What happens when we fulfill that law? Why is fulfilling that law so important? Why did Jesus cry out on the cross, "It is finished"? What is finished? That word finished, we'll get into it a little bit here, is tetelestai in the Greek, and that's a legal term. It's used in finance. It's used for when you're paying off a debt. And there's some stories that have floated around about this at times, where I've heard these stories from different sources over the years, where, and you may have heard this story, where somebody has paid a debt and they come in and they get their receipt stamped with tetelestai. It is completed. It is fulfilled. It is finished. It is done. That's not real. They didn't do that practice. But that word and how it's being used there is real. When you have paid off your debt, then that is tetelestai. That is completed, fulfilled. Let's begin with the two creation stories, because when we see that we are in a situation with dueling kingdoms, there's two kingdoms here, and they have been clearly presented in the Bible, but what Christianity has done is try to merge these two stories together. And it starts right in the very beginning. The first two chapters of your Bible contain the remnants of this story of these two dueling kingdoms, where we have one kingdom where people were created in the image and likeness of Elohim, and then a different story altogether, where instead of being made in the image and likeness of Elohim, we were made in the image of dirt. And Yahweh literally says, I formed humanity from the dirt. Well, I mean, that's an indictment of Yahweh right there. And it's very different to the original story. So let's head over to BibleZip.com and let's take a look at that original story in Genesis. And if you're not familiar with BibleZip, it's our Bible site. And let's just see if we can increase this text size and just do this as well. There we go. And so we've gone over this a whole bunch of times over the years, but let's just have a little refresher right now. We see such a difference here, such an incredible difference. So we've got, in the beginning, Elohim created heaven and earth. Now, as you may know, if you have listened to other scholars, because there's been a lot of talk about this, I guess the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years or something, where we know that the first verse of Genesis 1:1 should not be translated this way, the way it is here on the screen. We're using the God's Word translation here. We are developing our own translation, which will be more of a neutral translation, and we'll translate Genesis 1 correctly. I think there are a couple of translations, more obscure translations out there that have now translated it correctly. But we won't dwell on that right now. But it is important to know that the bias of Christianity has gone all the way to the way that we translate the biblical text. And so it obscures a lot of the truth from us. So let's scroll down. We are familiar with all of the story. I hope you are. You've read this. And we're going to go down to the creation of humanity here, verses 26 and verses 27. And let's read these. Then Elohim said, "Let us," so we're talking about a plural group. This is not referring to a trinity. There is no trinity in the Bible. The Catholics tried to add that in 1 John 5, and modern translations are correctly removing that Catholic addition from the text. This is talking about the divine council, a group of people. We are talking about a real kingdom, a real monarchy. If we were to look at England, we see that we have a king, we have a queen, we have princes, we have all kinds of extended royal family. They all fall under the umbrella of the House of Windsor. So they have their father's house, the one single house that encompasses the royal family. Let us make humans in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the domestic animals all over the earth, and all the animals that crawl in the earth. So Elohim created humans in his image. In the image of Elohim, he created them. He created them male and female. Now, I don't really diverge from a lot of Christianity here in terms of who's doing the creating and what's actually happening here, especially when we go to people that have what we call the divine council worldview, where we know that we're dealing with a divine council here. We know we're dealing with multiple people. And the idea here is that is fairly accepted, is that the Father is the one addressing everybody, just like we see over in Psalm 82. But it's Jesus himself that is doing the actual hands-on engineering. And it really is engineering. Things are a lot more real than the religious systems have made them out to be. And so what we find is a lot of fantasy in Christianity, a lot of storytelling. And what I want to do is try to be more real with the text, to try to understand original intent, and to understand things as much as possible from a historical and cultural perspective, also just encompassing everything we possibly can to understand what is being said in the text. Whereas religious systems come along with their beliefs, and they try to shoehorn their beliefs into the text, which is what you'll see here. People say, well, this, when it says us, it's talking about the Trinity. There's no concept of any Trinity here. But if we have a belief and a massive volume of text like the Bible, then we will find ways to read it into the text as we wish. We don't want to do that. We want to take things more at face value. That doesn't mean everything is literal. Of course, there's lots of metaphor in the Bible. But we want to be able to discern metaphor from reality and not allow reality to be turned into metaphor, or the other way around as well. Okay? And so certainly discernment is required when we're doing that. But here we see the first kingdom, or the kingdom, creating humankind. And we are not made from dirt. We are made in their image and likeness. And what does that mean? Well, Christianity will tell you that we're completely different from God. We don't bear any resemblance to God. To even make a suggestion that we're anything like God is almost blasphemy to many people. And yet here on the very first chapter of the Bible, every Bible, I think no matter what canon you have, Genesis comes first. Genesis chapter 1 comes first. And we see here a kingdom creating a new creation that is taking over from them, as we see here. Let them rule the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, etc. So we are being given purview over the earth. This is the purpose of the creation of humanity. And we've gone into the backstory on this a lot in other studies. We're not going to today. But this is the purpose of mankind, is to manage the earth. And to be fruitful and multiply, right? Elohim blessed them and said, let me highlight where I'm reading from near. Be fertile, increase in number, fill the earth and be its master. Rule the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that crawl on the earth. So we are being given a position where we are the stewards of this earth. But then something interesting happens as we scroll down. A separation marker, which should be here, is not. So we'll explain that briefly here. We've got this original creation story where mankind is created in the image and likeness, given purview, given a management over the earth, and it comes down here and we see that the Sabbath is of original intent. It's not something Yahweh introduced. There's a lot of people that think the Sabbath is all about Yahweh's rule, Yahweh's law, but there is no Yahweh here yet. Yahweh isn't mentioned here until, when I scroll down a little bit, right here, verse 4, and we'll get to that in a second. This is an important thing to note for those of you that are learning about the Sabbath. When Jesus said the Sabbath was for mankind, this is what he's referring to. By the seventh day, Elohim had finished the work he had been doing. On the seventh day, he stopped the work he had been doing. Then Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart as holy. This is the Father's work, not Yahweh's work. Because on that day, he stopped all his work of creation. So the idea of the Sabbath predates the introduction of Yahweh in the biblical text. But Yahweh being one of these Elohim and being under the kingdom is then also bringing that in. But it was there before him, and that's important. It's important when you see people talking about Jesus breaking the Sabbath. Well, he must have broken Yahweh's law because he broke the Sabbath. But the Sabbath is something outside of Yahweh's domain. Okay, so when we get down to verse 4 here, there's actually a break here in the text. Now, it's not obvious because it just kind of flows. But this comma here in the middle of verse 4 is actually where the text breaks. There's two different portions of text here that have been connected at some time in the past. And this is not me saying this. This is just bulk standard Bible scholarship. I don't think you would find any Bible scholar, not an apologist, not a theologian, but a scholar of the Bible, that would disagree with this. The first section, from this comma all the way up, is called the priestly account. And then the second, or the part that starts after the comma, is part of what we call the Yahwist account. These are not my words. These are standard scholarship words. And so this here, midway through verse 4, is actually the end and the beginning of two different documents that at one point were separate and then were joined together. And that's why we have this conflict in these creation stories. So all of this top story that we're reading ends with this. This is the account of heaven and earth when they were created. And that should be a period there. And then verse 4 really should start here. And now we go into the introduction of Yahweh. Yahweh wasn't around. Well, he was on the council here. He is one of the people that is present here during the initial creation. But then some things happened. And so all of a sudden we come along and we see at the time when Yahweh Elohim made earth and heaven. Well, that's so interesting because we have a verse here that's split down the middle by two different documents. And yet you see how they seem to flow into each other. This is the account of heaven and earth when they were created at the time when Yahweh Elohim made earth and heaven. But I'm afraid that that document is like this and ends there. And then this one begins here, and it's very different. And you will find the Christianity apologists will try to say, well, this is just like a rephrasing of the first story. But if you would just look at them both, and it would be great to get a notepad and draw a line down the middle of the page and go through the first creation story and write down the order of things and how things happen. And then as you get down to the second part, start on the second column and write down all the things that happen in the Yahwist account. And then compare them one with another. And you'll see they're not complementary. They contradict each other. And instead of trying to join them together and make them make sense with each other, we should be more honest and say they're two separate stories. They're telling us two different things. And that separation, that distinction, tells us something very, very important. Yahweh comes along and everything shifts. Everything changes. Okay? So here in verse 7, chapter 2, verse 7, then Yahweh Elohim formed the man from the dust of the earth. And these notes here in brackets are not mine, but they're provided by the God's Word translation. And that's completely different to what we just read. Everything is different. We were created in situ, in place, but then, verse 8, Yahweh Elohim planted a garden in Eden, and that's where he put the man that he had formed. We've got to be very, very careful with the way that we read the Bible, because we've been told to read it as one univocal story, one author, one story all the way through, and yet there are multiple stories, and they contradict each other and they bump up against each other. What Christianity is trying to conceal here is that we have a divided kingdom, and that somebody else has come along and has decided to tell his own version of events, and that is Yahweh. And that's because Yahweh is not the Father. Yahweh is one of the Elohim, but he is not the Elohim. He's not the Most High. He's one of the sons of the Most High. Now, this is important when we're looking at the Christmas story, because we need to know, well, why did Jesus come? We could say that Jesus came to take this second story where mankind is now being told that he comes from the dirt, and we are being restored instead to where we are made in the image of Elohim, male and female at once. Not one person first, and then the woman comes in as an afterthought. You have two extremely different personalities at work here. Do you see that? The level of respect Yahweh has for women, of course, you can see all through the Old Testament. And then the respect for women that Jesus has is a total contrast. And these contrasts reveal the tension that is in the text between these two parties. We have a divided kingdom. We have a group of people that created humankind, and yes, they are people. They're not humans. We're the humans, but we are very much like them, as we are told. And when the Christian says we're nothing like God, God disagrees with you. And you should stop saying things that are of human reasoning and understanding and echo what God says. That we are made in the image and likeness of them. Real people, biological people, immortal people that decided to create us to manage the earth that they had created. This is actually very, very important to the whole thing. The priestly account, the Yahwist account, this amazing contrast. And then we see, as we continue reading through this Yahwist account, not only were we made from dirt, but Yahweh starts to lie. Yahweh is the first individual in the biblical text to tell a lie to anybody. And then we see him lying and deceiving people from then on. For instance, he came to the Hebrews that were living in Egypt at the time, and he promised them these great promises that never eventuated for those people. He said, I'm going to rescue you from the slavery in Egypt, and I'm going to take you to a much, much better place, a lush, fertile place flowing with milk and honey. And when we look geographically, it's about a 6-day walk from where they were to Jerusalem. Well, how long did they spend? How long did it take them to actually get there? Over 40 years. And the vast majority of those people that left Egypt never saw the promised land. I think it's interesting that Christianity likes to talk all the time about the promised land when it was a broken promise. And that is so blatant in the text. Come on, let's get out of Egypt. I'm going to take you to a better place. Sometimes I wonder, when Yahweh comes and promises these things to these people, how we can, and that promise is then immediately broken, how do we continue to put Yahweh on such a pedestal? Why do we not look at the story and look at what Yahweh does and say to ourselves, wait just a minute. You went to these people, you promised them this wonderful new life, and you didn't give it to them. And yet we call it the promised land, but you broke that promise to them. There's something wrong there. In the days of just sweeping these lies and deceptions of Yahweh under the rug, using the excuse that, well, God is sovereign and he can do whatever he wants. That's great, but can God lie? Does God tempt or test people? Those two words, by the way, when we're looking at the Hebrew here, are exactly the same. So some people want to make a distinction between tempting and testing. And they will actually use that passage, what is it in James, where it says that God does not tempt us or test us as a way to say that Yahweh didn't do anything wrong, because he obviously didn't tempt us, because it says right here, God doesn't tempt us. Right. Which God are we talking about? Which Elohim are we talking about here? Because one definitely lied, and one definitely tested or tempted the people, and was rather explicit about doing so. He boasted about it. He actually said that I'm starving you to death in order to test how well you will follow me, no matter what happens to you. Jesus and his Father don't treat us that way at all. So there's a lot going on in the first two chapters of your Bible, and it would be good for you to start to study that. I hope you have a notebook and you can write some of these things down, and every so often just keep coming back to it. You know, if you leave something alone for a few months and then come back to it, you'll start to see much more. So he also then murders Adam and Eve. Yahweh is the individual responsible for introducing death into the human creation. Now, some people will say, no, that was the snake. Well, we have a whole study on that, obviously, called Two Gardens and a Snake, which you should watch. But it's Yahweh that cut Adam and Eve off from the tree of life. And the tree of life is essential for us to maintain our biological immortality. Without access to the fruit of the tree of life, we will eventually die. Yahweh said that they would die in the day that they ate it, which did not happen. And all kinds of excuses are made about that. Well, 1,000 days to a human is like one day to God, and all of these kinds of things. But it's talking about a general 24-hour day. It's a threat. And that threat was so serious that when Eve echoes that threat, she says we can't eat it or even touch it. So Eve is suggesting that that fruit is actually toxic. We can't even touch it or we will die. And of course, the snake was shocked. It said, you surely will not die from eating the fruit. And that turned out to be correct. And then people want to say, well, no, the snake lied because he knew that Yahweh would kill them by cutting them off from the fruit of the tree of life. So you admit Yahweh killed them. Right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to make that argument that the snake should have known that Yahweh was going to kill them, then you're admitting Yahweh killed them by cutting them off from the fruit of the tree of life. The Christmas story is about restoring what Yahweh has done and bringing it back to the condition of the first creation story. We have a divided kingdom. That's why we have these two creation accounts in the Bible. And this is not something we can just overlook. These are excruciatingly important details that if we don't take note of and take seriously, we are not going to understand what is actually going on in this story. We're not going to understand what Christmas is really all about. The divine council, led by the Father and his Son, Jesus, the Creator, the engineer, that actually physically made us. And the second guy whose name suddenly appears in the text, in the second chapter, after we've all been created in the image and likeness of the Elohim, comes along, tells us a completely different story, says we're made from dirt, lies to Adam about what would happen if they eat the fruit, and then decides to kill Adam and Eve by cutting them off from the nutrient required for their longevity. And this is what Jesus then restores. The last couple of pages of your Bible talk about this restoration. And so we've got this separation that occurs, and Yahweh is responsible for that separation, that division. And then it's Jesus who comes and fulfills Yahweh's law and then reconciles humanity back to the Father. Two different systems at play. And then finally restores us to the fruit of the tree of life, which we had free access to in the beginning. Okay? We have to read the Bible more holistically than we have been so that we can notice the details, what's really going on here. A kingdom coup. So some of these things we don't have blatant texts in our Bibles that can give us, that we can read from, that provide the information and context for these things. We do outside of the Bible. There are much, much older texts that we have that talk about the power struggle between the two brothers, talks about the separation, and records many of the major events that occurred. For example, the flood story, which I haven't put into here, but the flood story in the Bible says that Yahweh is going to send a flood, but then Yahweh also went and selected Noah to survive. But in much older stories, we see that that is not the case. We see that the flood was a natural catastrophe that was on its way. They knew about it. They knew it was going to happen. And Yahweh convinced the council that the job was too big, and he didn't like humans, so he didn't really have any vested interest in saving them. They were Jesus' project, not his. And Yahweh convinced them that we will not warn the humans, and we certainly won't try to rescue them. It would have been a massive undertaking. How do you get all these people off of the planet? Because you have to get them off planet somehow. And in those older stories, we see that it was Yahweh that convinced the council, but then it was Jesus who went to Noah and told him something bad is going to happen. Here's some instructions to follow. Build a vessel and tell everyone to come. What we do see is that Satan was cast down to the earth. Well, that's interesting. And we know that Satan is the god of this world, right? But who in the Old Testament declares himself the god of this world? Who boasts about it over and over? Not some other figure, dressed in red with a pitchfork in his hand, but rather an Elohim that controls the earth. And that is Yahweh. Two systems, a divided kingdom. So Yahweh, in these ancient texts, we see the details more. tried to overthrow his father. But we also see this in the Greek and Roman mythologies, quote unquote, as well. Right? We see where Jupiter tried to overthrow Saturn. And in the Roman pantheon and in the Greek pantheon, we see where Zeus tried to overthrow, or did overthrow, Kronos. That's the stories. But of course, this is written from the perspective of the victor. So the echoes of this event we can see in other cultures. And I am not of the opinion that we should look only at the Bible. There's a lot of people that think, well, we should only look at the Bible. Well, I don't remember Jesus saying that any time, actually. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom. And seeking first the kingdom might mean that we evaluate all the evidence that is around us. Okay? So Yahweh tries to overthrow the Father. He wants to be God. Yahweh is cast down to earth. So now we have this divided kingdom. And Jesus spoke about that divided kingdom. I have the passages for that here in just a second. So let's move on to the first Christmas. How did Jesus get here? Now this is interesting, and there's many different ideas on, let me just hide that for a second, on when Jesus was born. Most people readily admit that December 25 is probably not the actual date of Jesus' birth. I think it's fairly close. I think it's a little after Jesus' birth, if John 1:14 is telling us what I think it is telling us. So John here is speaking, and he says, the Logos became human and tabernacled among us. Now, what I find interesting here is we've got this story of a census being taken in the text. And this story of the census being taken has kind of ruffled the feathers of scholarship for a long time, because we know there was no census being taken, and the text that tells us, well, everyone had to return to his place of birth for a census makes no sense whatsoever, because why would you do that? The census is to count the people living where they are. It has nothing to do with where they were born. But there's something very interesting about this. We have a Feast of Tabernacles. And in that Feast of Tabernacles, people do move. And people do go and occupy inns, so there's no room there for anybody to stay. It's like right now, right? Christmas. Like I noticed driving around today, the hotels around here are packed because people have left their homes and have traveled to come and be with family, and so they're staying in a hotel. Oh. And so if this was happening during the Feast of Tabernacles, well, now it makes sense. Not a census. It was the Feast of Tabernacles. And John tells us the Logos became human and tabernacled among us. Now, you'll find this word tabernacled here usually translated as dwelt. But if you look at the underlying Greek word in your study Bible, or if you have a Strong's Concordance, or if you have a Greek lexicon, you'll see that that word means tabernacled. And in the Feast of Tabernacles, or Feast of Booths, they build what they call a sukkah on the side of their permanent dwelling, and they perform all kinds of ceremonies, and they eat inside the sukkah. Well, that's what's being referred to here. So I think that what John is telling us here, and maybe John wasn't correct, but I think that what John is telling us here is that Jesus was born on Feast of Tabernacles, and that he came and tabernacled with humankind. And where was Jesus born? Well, we use the word manger in the text, but when you look at a sukkah, I should have pulled up an image of a sukkah to show you. But a sukkah is this very rudimentary structure. It's a temporary structure. It's only kept up there for a Feast of Tabernacles, then it's removed. that would make sense. There's no room for anywhere, but somebody had pity and said, hey, you could stay in the sukkah, right? And the sukkah is where we get Sukkot from, right? Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths, or Sukkot. So is John telling us that Jesus was born on Sukkot? I think so. There are other excellent arguments for the birth date of Jesus. I am not suggesting this is the one. It is one of several options. I think that the timing is right. This usually happens in September. It changes every year because the Hebrew system is based on a lunar calendar, whereas the Gregorian calendar is on a solar lunar calendar. But it seems likely that Jesus could have been born during Sukkot or at some other time. But it does seem to be that is what John is telling us here in John 1:14. Okay? So Jesus breaks into Yahweh's world as one of Yahweh's subjects. And this is one of the things that a lot of my critics are missing as part of their context. So let's talk about this. The criticisms will be saying things like, why did Jesus follow Yahweh's law if Yahweh is Satan? Now, maybe we need to address that word Satan. That word Satan means the adversary or the accuser. And so when people say, well, there is no the Satan in the Bible, well, there is. What has happened over time, and these things happen just as it does, for us in our world, is something gets started, and then you end up with, maybe I can think of an example. In sports, we'll call somebody the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And we have a tendency, if one of our friends does something great, oh, you're the GOAT. And so we're saying they're the greatest of all time, but we don't mean that really, right? So we use it like that, but then we will pick somebody out of multiple generations of people and say, but this person is the GOAT. And so we have a common term that's used for multiple people and very casually at times. But then there will be someone that will come along and will say, but that person, they were the true GOAT. And so we end up personifying a person as the GOAT. And that's very much what has happened here with the word Satan. The word is actually very similar in both Hebrew and Greek. In Hebrew, we would pronounce it slightly differently as Satan, and we would add ha to the front of that, ha Satan, or the Satan, the adversary, the accuser. And in Greek, it's Satanas. And so what has happened here is, yes, we have a general word that can be used for many, many different people. If you sued me for something, you would be the Satan. You're the accuser of me, okay? But other people wouldn't necessarily say the same thing, right? Because they don't have any relationship to that person. But if you've got somebody that was running a massive legal system and they were the adversary and the accuser of everybody, then eventually we would say that person is the Satan, ha Satan, the Satan. So some people want to correct this and say there is no Satan, there's no individual Satan, but there is. There is an individual who throughout time continued to be the adversary of the kingdom and the adversary of humankind, and became known as the adversary, the accuser, the Satan. So we do have a figure who is the Satan. And that is what we have with Yahweh. And we see this very clearly in the temptation, but, well, let me switch these around, talk about this one first. So Jesus is in total submission to Yahweh, total submission to Yahweh. And we see that in the temptation. I think I talk about the temptation a little bit further on here as we get into it. So I will leave that and we'll come back to it here in just a second. So Jesus has come to confront Yahweh's law. That context is absolutely essential and vital to understanding Jesus' ministry. He was born into this world on Christmas Day, whatever day that is, for one purpose: to fulfill the adversary's law. So that means he submits himself to Yahweh. That means he follows Yahweh's law. Following Yahweh's law and submitting himself to Yahweh in worship does not mean he is signing off on those things. We could find so many different examples of that just in all across the spectrum of life. I'm just trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but the gym that I go to is closing early today. Well, I can't hang around after closing hours. I have to be in full submission to the gym, at least when it comes to their hours. And so that doesn't mean that I agree with what the gym is doing. If I leave before the gym closes early today, that doesn't mean I agree with that at all. I don't actually. I wish they were open late tonight, but they're not. They're already closed. Okay? So you see that me submitting myself to their rules doesn't mean I agree with those rules. Okay? They changed their hours today because it's Christmas Eve and they're closed all day tomorrow. That doesn't mean I wish they were closed or I'm in agreement with it. It just is what it is. I'm in a situation where I have a contract with them and they get to set the hours and I don't have a say in that. And that's the same as what Jesus is dealing with. He's submitting himself to Yahweh. He's submitting himself to Yahweh's law. It does not mean he agrees with it. And that's why he says many, many times, especially in Matthew chapter 5, your law, not my law, your law. It is written in your law. That's why he will say, well, it has been said in your law, but I tell you. So Jesus has come to confront Yahweh's law, but not because he's in agreement with it, but because there is a very specific reason. He has to. That's his whole entire purpose for coming, is to submit himself to his enemy. So, confronting Yahweh's law. Let me just close these up. We're going to explore some of these things here. Let's begin with a divided kingdom. You say, well, how do we know that the kingdom is divided? Because Jesus said so. So here we can see it here in all three of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Matthew, he said, every kingdom divided against itself is destroyed. In Mark, he says, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. In Luke, every kingdom divided against itself is destroyed. Well, this is in all three of the synoptic gospels. Now, if you're wondering, I try not to use biblical lingo as much as possible. So synoptic just means that they're in agreement with each other. We have three gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that are all telling very similar stories, and we can track many of those stories across all three gospels. Whereas John completely stands alone. Okay, so we have four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Synoptic Gospels have a lot of parallels with each other. They tell a lot of the same stories. We could often find the same stories in each one. And then we have a different gospel, the Gospel of John, which is altogether different and tells a lot of different stories that are not in some of them, but not nowhere near as many as the Synoptic Gospels. Okay? So in these three Gospels that all tell very similar stories, but they don't always all contain the same stories. Usually we find that the story is just in two of the Gospels, or we'll find it in two of the Gospels and then a tiny little snippet or like a mention in another one of the Gospels. In fact, that's what we find with the temptation story, and we'll get to that more in a second. But the temptation story is in full detail in two Gospels and then has a brief mention in another one, but it doesn't go into the full story. That doesn't go into the transaction between the adversary, the Satan, the devil, in the temptation. Okay, so we know that we have a divided kingdom. Jesus said so. And the fact that it's in all three Gospels, that really makes it very concrete. Now, the conversation with Pontius Pilate, well, that's really interesting. We have a study on that, and I would encourage you to watch that. I think it's called A Conversation with Pilate, or maybe it's called, no, I think it is called that, and then there's a subtitle on that, I think, called Why Pilate Tries to Save Jesus' Life, or Yeshua's Life. That is a good watch. You want to go and watch that. I discovered some things in that story that we don't think anyone else has ever talked about before. Very powerful story, this whole dialogue, but let's look at some of that right now. So in this conversation with Pilate, Pilate says, "Where did you come from?" And the context of this question, what's surrounding this question, is what makes it a big, big deal. Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." Now, how does that make any sense? Yahweh has been here, has established his kingdom here, has raised up his people. He says he owns all the kingdoms of the world. Now Jesus is on the scene and says, "My kingdom is not of this world." What? How do we reconcile that? Because we have a divided kingdom. We have the kingdom of Abba, and we have the kingdom of Yahweh, which is a break-off from Abba's kingdom. And now we have Abba's son Jesus coming in to confront the divided kingdom. So Jesus correctly says, "My kingdom is not of this world, as Yahweh's kingdom is." Jesus also says, "My followers would fight." Well, let's look at the context of that. We've got a couple of snippets here from John 18 and John 19. Let's read John 18:36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom doesn't belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. My kingdom doesn't have its origin on earth. My kingdom doesn't have its origin on earth," but there's so much here. Okay, my kingdom doesn't belong to this world. This is a complete contradiction to Yahweh's own statements. Yahweh's kingdoms are on this world. He says they are his. Then he says, "If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jews." Well, this part here, my followers would fight. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would fight. What is he referencing here? What is he referencing? Whoops. What on earth did I do? Okay. What is he referencing here? I am so sorry. I'm on the wrong page. There we go. Just think about this for 1 second here. Am I just totally... Where are we? Okay. Sorry, I have a few screens here. Can you see what I'm seeing here? Whose followers would fight? Yahweh's followers would fight. Right? Yahweh's followers would fight. Because that's what they did. That's their history. That is their modus operandi. If anything is going on, if anything's in trouble, they're going to fight. They build armies. They go to war. And Jesus is absolutely blatantly saying he is not Yahweh, and he does not do things the way Yahweh and his followers do things. He's saying, if my kingdom belonged to this world, belonged to Yahweh, my followers would fight. But his kingdom is not of this world. And then he reinforces it, saying, my kingdom doesn't have its origin on earth. But Yahweh removed the Hebrews and built his kingdom from them where? On this earth. And Jesus says, my kingdom doesn't have its origin on earth. So we're left with a very, very clear distinction here. But now let's take a little peek at this. I kind of added this. We're already gone. We have not been recording for 57 minutes. Have we really? I am so sorry. I thought we were going to be here I thought this study might be too short for everybody. Time. Wow. Really? I'm having serious time dilation. It feels like I've been here for 10 minutes, like quite seriously. Let's continue. We might be here for a while. Who knows? We'll just go with the flow like always. Let's read this. This is from John 19, the next chapter, verses 6 through 11. And I'm going to read it through first, and then we're going to look at a very interesting detail, okay? When the chief priests and the guards saw Jesus, they shouted, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate told them, "You take him and crucify him. I don't find this man guilty of anything." The Jews answered Pilate, "We have a law, and by that," whose law? Yahweh's law. Okay. "We have a law, and by that law he must die because he claimed to be the son of Theos, the son of God." That was an interesting thing for Pilate to hear. Okay? This part here, he claimed to be the son of Theos. Now, look at Pilate's reaction. When Pilate heard them say that, he became more afraid than ever. Why? What? Why? What's the context? Why would Pilate be afraid? Apparently he was already concerned, because the writer of John added, "than ever." But why would Pilate become more afraid than ever before? It's kind of hard to see in the context here so far. I mean, we have a law, and by that law he must die because he claimed to be the son of Theos. Well, it must have something to do with that claim. Because he claimed to be the son of Theos. That he already knows about their law, and then he must, so that can't be it. So it must be because he claimed to be the son of Theos. Why would that make Pilate afraid? On the surface, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, right? Let's look now at Pilate's reaction. So the Jews, the religious leaders, say He claimed to be the son of Theos, and Pilate is now afraid. Afraid of what? What does he care about all of their Jewish stuff? He's a Roman. Let's continue then. When Pilate heard them say that, he became more afraid than ever. And then, what's his action? He went into the palace again and asked Jesus, where? Oh dear. I just love this so much. Where are you from? Now, Jesus and Pilate had had some conversation up to this point. The religious leaders said he claimed to be the son of Theos. Pilate is now terrified. Why? How does it make any sense? Why does he care? But then he goes into Jesus and he asks them this peculiar question that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the context. Where are you from? What do you mean, where are you from? What does that matter right now? This guy's being executed, or trying to be executed by the judgment of the Jews. And Pilate, upon being told that he claimed to be the Son of God, comes in to Jesus and says, where are you from? How does that make any sense? Where are you from? You know, if you didn't have all of the background context of all these other things, this just wouldn't make any sense. And it hasn't made any sense. And as far as I can tell, no one has ever connected these dots before. We have an old study on this, but it doesn't make sense on the surface. But then look at Jesus' reaction. But Jesus didn't answer him. So you can go back and you can read John 18 and 19 and see this conversation that he's been having with Pilate. Right? And now Jesus clams up. Why? So there's something very, very major going on here, right? You've got Pilate's question, which seems out of place, but clearly it wasn't, because it silenced Jesus. Jesus doesn't want to answer that question. Why? Why? But Jesus didn't answer him. So Pilate presses in and says to Jesus, aren't you going to answer me? So obviously Pilate here is trying to get this answer out of him. Pilate then says, don't you know that I have the authority to free you or to crucify you? And then Jesus answers. Jesus answered Pilate, you wouldn't have any authority over me if it hadn't been given to you from above. That's why the man who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Okay, but why did Pilate ask where he was from? What did Pilate know that is not explicitly mentioned in this paragraph? Why was where are you from the question Pilate asks after the religious leaders said that he claimed to be a son of God? None of this seems to make sense on the surface, except from the context I teach. We have two kingdoms that are at war with each other. Pilate has a little bit of an understanding of this. He's a senior Roman. These people are involved in their cultic practices. He would be remembering when he was younger, about 30 years ago, where they were hunting down a young child. And were they told at that time that somebody important had been born on the scene and they were looking for him, and Jesus escaped to Egypt to get away from that? It's funny how he escaped to Egypt, this reversal of the Exodus. And Pilate really wants him to answer the question, but Jesus refuses. Jesus never answers the question. But Pilate understood. The context that I teach makes sense of passages like this, where 2,000 years or thereabouts of Christianity has not been able to provide an explanation for what is actually going on here. When the religious leaders told Pilate that this man of this age, of this location, is suddenly on the scene and he claimed to be the Son of God, Pilate is going, wait a second. And he runs into Jesus and asks a question that seems out of context unless you know what's going on, and says, where are you from? Where are you from? I go into this in much greater detail in that study that I mentioned on Pilate and Jesus. You should definitely watch that study. It's one of my favorite studies. You know, I love to study in the text and find things in the text, and I've found a few things, but this is one that is so interesting to me. What did this human being, Pilate, know about the whole story and what's actually going on? He sure knew something. We don't know exactly what, but he sure had some details. He now suspects Jesus is the very one they were hunting 30 years ago. And so now he has to find out, where are you from? I don't know if this story is hitting you the way it hits me, but these stories with these details that are right there, hidden in plain sight, but aren't understood without the context that I have found in the Bible. And then you find that context, and then you read passages like this and you go, wait, now it all makes sense. Pilate knows who Jesus is, and he is terrified. He doesn't want to have anything to do with this. I'm not going to be responsible for executing a son of God. Because their whole mythology at that time, they understood that there were sons of the gods. There were gods, what we call Elohim, like we were reading about back in Genesis 1. And here now is Pilate with a lot of this knowledge, because when we look at the Greek and the Roman pantheons, we see a total cross-matching of those individuals to other pantheons around the world, and this is the kingdom. I think this is totally fascinating. So Pilate understood something. So what do we get from this? Where did Jesus come from is an important detail that we cannot overlook. What did Pilate know? Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. Jesus says, my followers would fight if my kingdom was of this world, because that's what Yahweh's kingdom and his followers do. They fight. They are a military superpower. They're a warfaring nation. Is this exciting? A different father. Let's read from John 8, this snippet from John 8. All these little snippets we're going to look at here, we'll tie them all together here as we get to the end. So, John 8:41. Now, this contains the famous John 8:44. And there's a lot of people that try to make this something it's not. And yet, if you just read the whole of John 8, we've done a lot of studies on this, it's very clear what is going on here. And it's very clear why Christian apologetics has tried to make this say anything except what it actually says. Let's start here in verse 41. Now, this is cutting in halfway through a conversation, so if you want full context here, you're going to need to go to John chapter 8 and read the whole thing, okay? And I mean the whole thing. Not from verse 1. You've got the story there of the woman caught in adultery, which is added into the text at a later date. Still a good story. We're not going to take that away from the Bible. It's in the spirit of Jesus, but that story we know is added on later. It's not in the oldest manuscripts we have. But from verse 12 or verse 13, this begins, and it goes all the way through to the end. This is one of the most important dialogues in the Bible. So we're cutting in halfway through the story, and Jesus has been having this conversation with religious leaders and people that had been following him, but he'd been saying some things they were getting unsettled by and were starting to reconsider whether they should be following him at all. And so they become adversarial. And they're having this conversation over lineage, over who are the children of Abraham, and we will join it here. You're doing, this is Jesus speaking, you're doing what your father does. That's Jesus. Then it begins, the Jews said to Jesus, we're not illegitimate children. This is poking fun at Jesus and his birth story. Okay, so it's, when we're looking at how Jesus was born and things like this, there are some that are more Marcionite leaning. A lot of people like to say I'm a Marcionite. I certainly am not. Those who lean more towards Marcion and his Apostolikon, which is his pared down version of Luke that he had in the first biblical canon, and they want to cut out the birth stories. But this is an acknowledgement of those birth stories. So better be careful about what you decide to cut out of the Bible to fit your theology. Okay, now I don't think everything in the Bible is totally correct, but when we've got this here, you can't really clip the birth stories out because they're referencing the whole birth story about Jesus' birth and, Joseph and getting pregnant before they got married and all this kind of thing. That's what they're saying here. The Jews said to Jesus, we're not illegitimate children like you. Okay? Theos is our only father. Now, we have to be careful when we're using the word theos here because they're using it differently to what Jesus is using it. And this is all through the New Testament. The word theos is used depending on context. Theos does not mean God the Father, Abba Father. It can, but it also means any other God or deity that exists in the Bible or in the region, in Rome, when this is going on. Well, this is not in Rome, it's under Roman occupation, but this is in Israel. So you determine the meaning of this word by its context. So that's important. Don't get caught up there going, wait, but it says theos here and it says theos there. Yeah, but they're not using theos in the same way. When let's say I'm having a conversation with any other religious person, a Hindu or a Muslim, and they say, Allah is my God. Well, Allah is just the Arabic word for God. It's the English equivalent of God, okay? And so if I was to reply, not that I would, but just as an example, and say, no, God is the only God. Well, we're both using the same word, okay? But we mean very different things by it, all right? And that's what's going on right here. You got a conversation between two people that both see someone different as their God, okay? So they are replying to Jesus here. Theos is our only Father. And this was the trap that Jesus had walked them into in this whole conversation. This is what he wanted to get them to set the context that, yes, you are claiming Yahweh is your God and you are his children, right? He is your Father. So we won't, like in an actual Bible, we could replace this and say Yahweh is our only Father. Is there any Christian in the world that disagrees that that is what they were talking about? No, that's exactly what they were talking about. There's zero disagreement there, okay? So Yahweh is our only Father. That's what they mean when they use the word theos. Jesus told them, if theos, now we could go ahead and maybe I should, as we'll do a study on this and we'll change these words. so that you can see a little clearer. If Theos were your father, now Jesus is talking about the Theos. In other words, now he's saying, you think Yahweh is Theos. Oh, but he's not. Okay? If Theos were your father, you would love me. After all, I am here, and I came from Theos. I don't come on my own. Instead, Theos sent me. Why don't you understand the language I use? Is it because you can't understand the words I use? Other translations will put here, is it because you cannot accept the things I am saying? Which I think is actually a better translation here, because understand, in fact, we'll just do this. Other translations have it there. Is it because you can't accept the words I use, or the things that I'm saying? And that is the case. They can't. So because they won't accept what he's saying, they can't understand what he's saying. Does that make sense? Then Jesus continues, you come from your father the devil, and you desire to do what your father wants you to do. Now, that's a pretty bold thing to say, right? You come from your father the devil. Now, in my context, that makes total sense. He's talking about Yahweh here. You come from your father, the devil. If that's Yahweh, then all of this paragraph suddenly makes sense. And then he says, the devil was a murderer from the beginning. He has never been truthful. He doesn't know what the truth is. Whenever he tells a lie, he's doing what comes naturally to him. He's a liar and the father of lies. You cannot escape what Jesus is saying here. Jesus gets them to say, Yahweh is our only Father. There's no theologian, there's no apologist, there's no scholar that disagrees that when they use the word theos there, that they are talking about Yahweh. You wouldn't disagree with that. It's the only way it makes sense. That's a true statement. Yahweh is our only Father. Okay? So the Jews have just said that their Father, their God, is Yahweh. They've made that crystal clear. Some Christians want to say, no, they had left following Yahweh, they were worshipping Satan. Yeah, good try, but the whole of the New Testament disagrees with you there. They have always been following Yahweh. They never left and followed somebody else. They were following his law. They were doing his things. Jesus even talks about this in this first line here, and if you read up above it, where we don't have here on the screen, they're seeking to kill him. And that's why Jesus says, you're doing what your father does, killing. So then he says, you come from your father, the devil, and you desire to do what your father wants you to do. The devil was a murderer from the beginning. He has never been truthful. That is what we read about up here. Yahweh lies to Adam about the consequences of eating the fruit. The fruit did not kill Adam or Eve. He did. He is the murderer, not the fruit. You don't get poison fruit and stick it there and say, don't eat this one. And it looked really good, but don't eat it. That's tempting them. That's a test. But God the Father, Abba Father, doesn't test, doesn't tempt. But putting a tree in the garden and saying, you have access to everything except that one. Don't touch it now. If you touch it, you will die. You will surely die. And then they don't die from eating the fruit at all. They die because Yahweh evicts them from the garden, cutting them off from the fruit of the tree of life. So Yahweh murders Adam and Eve. Go back to here. The devil was a murderer from the beginning, right? So killing what You're doing what your father does, which was killing them. I should have added on a little bit earlier back so we could see that context that Jesus is talking about killing them, but you can just go check for yourself. It's in the preceding verses. Read verses 39 and 40. You'll see that there. So then he says, you come from your father, the devil, and desire to do what your father wants to do. What is Yahweh known for doing? Killing, stealing, killing, destroying. So he's a lying murderer from the beginning. The devil was a murderer from the beginning. He has never been truthful. So he is a lying murderer from the beginning. We can read a little further on. He doesn't know what the truth is. Whenever he tells a lie, he's doing what comes naturally to him. He's a liar and the father or the progenitor of lies. Right, that's what we just saw here. He is the father of lies. He is the progenitor of lies. He is a murderer. Now, what's interesting is when we look at what Jesus said here, he says from the beginning specifically, the devil was a murderer from the beginning. What we're reading up here is in Genesis. Well, the Hebrew word for Genesis is Bereshit. Bereshit. What does Bereshit mean? Beginnings. The devil was a murderer from the Bereshit, from the Genesis. I don't know how you weasel your way out of this one. Jesus is absolutely clearly telling us that Yahweh is the devil and is the lying murderer from the original Genesis story. He is pointing back to Genesis 2 and what Yahweh did. I mean, that's as clear as you can get, in my opinion. Seek the kingdom. I did it again. This is in Matthew 6, and this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible, Matthew 6:33. I used to own the domain name, m633.com. I should have kept it. It's great to have a 4-letter domain. Somebody else owns it now. That's fine. But that's how important it was to me. Matthew 6, if ever I don't have any tattoos, but if I ever was to get a tattoo, it would probably be Matthew 6:33 or something on my wrist. This has been the one thing that Jesus has said that has driven me all my life. Seek first the kingdom of God and what has his approval. So let's read this here. Don't ever worry and say, what are we going to eat, or what are we going to drink, or what are you going to wear? Because they were worried about all those things during the Exodus, especially food and water. Everyone is concerned about these things, and your heavenly Father certainly knows you need them all. But first, be concerned about his kingdom and what has his approval. Then all these things will be provided for you. Okay? Tempted by Yahweh. Seek first the kingdom, buddy. You've got to seek first the kingdom. So, a temptation, being tempted by Yahweh, when we look at the temptation story, we obviously know that Jesus was not tempted by Yahweh, but Jesus was tempted by Satan the devil. But if Yahweh is Satan the devil, then that would make them one and the same. And the problem with the temptation story is all of these three tests: listening to Yahweh's voice, choosing Yahweh or the kingdoms that Jesus came for, or trusting in Yahweh's protection. That's what each test is about. All are tests on obedience to Yahweh and require Yahweh to not only be present, but to be the conductor of the test. Now, I have a whole series on this, and It's called Two Tests, One Tester. And that's a long study, and you should go and take a look at that, where we break down what's happening here in the temptation story. So we're not going to go through that today. You'll just have to trust me for now, but you can go watch the whole study and you can see it can't not be Yahweh. If it's not Yahweh, none of the tests work. If it's some stand-in for Yahweh, that's what some apologists try to argue, well, then it doesn't work. Yahweh has to be there to catch Jesus if he jumps. He has to trust Yahweh's protection, right? Yahweh says, well, turn this stone into bread. And Jesus replies with what Yahweh said to the Hebrews, that no, I must listen to the voice of Yahweh instead of eating bread. Yahweh boasted in this point. Yahweh is so narcissistic that he says himself, and it's recorded in your Bible, where Yahweh says, you are being starved so that you understand that you must learn to live not by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of my mouth. That's what this test is about. That's why Jesus says no, and quotes that very text back in Yahweh's face, says, no, because I need to listen to your voice, which requires it to be Yahweh testing him, because it's Yahweh's voice that's talking to him. Otherwise, he's not listening to Yahweh's voice. Yahweh's voice has to be there. Yahweh's voice has to be the one speaking to him right now, asking him to turn the stones into bread. And Jesus says, no, I need to just listen to your voice as you said, right? In the second test, the devil offers Jesus all of the kingdoms of the world and says, if you worship me, I will give you all the stuff you came for. And Jesus' reply is, no, I must worship only you, not the stuff. My purpose here is to fulfill your law, not to be entertained by all this stuff, okay, which was the fixation of the Hebrews, the trap of the Hebrews. Yahweh said, I'll give you all the stuff. It was bait. He didn't give it to them at all. They all died in the desert instead. Come out of Egypt, I'm taking you to a beautiful promised land. It's flowing with milk and honey and green pastures. It's going to be incredible. Oh, on second thoughts, let's spend 40 years here in the desert on a eugenics experiment, starving you to death so that you learn to listen to my voice. And so Yahweh here makes the same offer. He's tempting Jesus with the stuff, the same thing he did with the Hebrews in Egypt. Come on, I'll give you all the stuff if you just come with me. Now he's doing the exact same thing. The devil here offers Jesus all of Yahweh's kingdoms and Yahweh's glory, which Yahweh specifically said he would never share with another. So we know it's a trap. How did the devil get all of Yahweh's stuff to offer to Jesus? The devil isn't some other person that received all of these things from Yahweh who's then going to offer it to some other dude. It's the same person. Yahweh is offering his kingdoms to Jesus. And Jesus says, no, I will only worship you. People use this all the time as some kind of counter to the things I teach. They will say, no, but what about this? The fact that that this individual is offering all of Yahweh's kingdoms to Jesus and the glory that comes along with it proves it's Yahweh making the offer. Jesus' response does not prove that he is the Son of Yahweh. It proves that he is in total submission to Yahweh and his law, the very thing he came to do. In the third test, Yahweh says, jump off, because it is written that I will catch you, or send my angels to catch you if you were so much as to stub your toe on a rock. And if I go into this in far more detail, there's some very interesting things here. Go and watch 2 Tests, 1 Tester. Actually, there's some more stuff I've seen there that I know is not in that study, but we will do a refresh of that study sometime next year, 2026, and we'll add in more evidence that it absolutely is Yahweh here. But Yahweh is asking him to jump and saying, but Yahweh will rescue you, requiring Yahweh's presence. All 3 tests are about Yahweh. The tests require Yahweh to be conducting the tests, or they don't work. If it's anyone other than Yahweh, the tests don't work. Jesus would just go, like, who do you think you are? You can't offer me any of this. And what would be wrong with turning a stone into bread? Nothing would be wrong with that. Eating bread is not against Yahweh's law, unless Yahweh is the one testing you. Do you get that now? The temptation story has been the most concealed story of the Bible. It completely unravels Christianity. It shows us absolutely unequivocally that Yahweh is Satan the devil. Here in the story, the gospel writer calls the individual testing Jesus the devil, the diabolos. And Jesus calls him the Satanas, the Satan. So in this temptation story, the one opposing Jesus is called Satan the devil. But it has to be Yahweh. It can only be Yahweh. None of these 3 tests work unless it is Yahweh, and Jesus quotes Yahweh's own words back to his face in the trap Yahweh is setting for him. We need to see what's going on here. The temptation story is, I think, the clearest example in the entire Bible that Yahweh is Satan, the devil, the evil one. Well, I don't know. John 8:44 is competing there for first place. I would say, let me just turn the fan down, it's starting to cool off a bit, that there is so much in the text that shows us what's going on here. The Lord's Prayer, it teaches us about Jesus, Father. It talks about, may his kingdom come. Well, how does that work when all Yahweh's kingdoms are here? You see, okay, that doesn't make the slightest bit of sense if Yahweh is God, as the Christianity religion says. Because if God's kingdom was to come here, what is here now? Yahweh's already said he owns the earth and everything in it. So why is Jesus telling his disciples to pray that God's kingdom comes to earth when it's already here? How does that make the slightest bit of sense? Sorry, I could be more professional and wait, but it is so dry here. It is crazy. I have to put that on. Then Jesus ends this prayer by saying, do not lead us into a time of testing, but deliver us from the evil one. I mean, this could not be more clear. What is that referring to? Who was the one that led the Hebrews into a time of testing over 40 years and still ongoing? Yahweh. What is Jesus calling the one that led them into the time of testing? The evil one. Do not lead us into a time of testing, but deliver us from the evil one. I wear on my finger here the Lord's Prayer, and it's a cheap ring. It's not made of precious metals or anything. Oh, you can't resolve that at all. No. Oh, you can't see it. Anyway, it's hard to see even with the naked eye. The text is so small, but we've got the Lord's Prayer on 5 lines, all around the ring. The Lord's Prayer means a lot to me, and I didn't even know about these things until a few years ago when I found them. The whole of the Lord's Prayer is talking about Yahweh, and it doesn't stop at the Lord's Prayer. Now, the Lord's Prayer is across 2 different Gospels, Luke and Matthew, and in the Luke version, it continues, and I've named this the Good Father Discourse. We have the prayer, but then we have all this dialogue that comes off of this theme. It doesn't get interrupted. It's the same context all the way through from the beginning to the end. You see this divided kingdom. You see Jesus talking about a new kingdom. Why is Jesus talking about Yahweh in this manner? Why is Jesus calling Yahweh the evil one? Oh, it's undeniable. Every single line in that prayer is a reference to the way Yahweh treated the Hebrews during the Exodus. And everything after it as well, all the way through verse 13, does the same thing. It compares, it raises the treatment of the Hebrews by Yahweh during the Exodus and compares that with what Jesus is saying, that me and my Father will not treat you that way. And even down the bottom where we're talking about sending snakes instead of fish, Jesus says to these humans that even you wouldn't behave like Yahweh did in the Exodus. Why do we have all of these big portions of Jesus' words indicting Yahweh? And why doesn't Christianity tell us about any of them, not even a single one? There's something going on here, right? It is finished. This is a simple, short one. I didn't grab the text here for this one. I guess I didn't grab it for that one either, but you can go look these up. I was wanting this to be a lot shorter, actually. I thought we would be here a rather short period of time. So on the cross, Jesus cried out, "It is finished." And this word finished is the word tetelestai. And tetelestai, I mentioned it earlier, didn't I? So I won't repeat myself, but this is a legal and financial word where when a contract has been fulfilled, you would say it has been tetelestai. It has been completed. It has been fulfilled. It has been paid off. The ransom has been paid. All right? Why do we have Jesus being tested by Yahweh? Jesus talking about Yahweh and his kingdoms versus his Father's kingdoms. Why does Jesus talk about seeking the kingdom? Well, how do you seek a kingdom that's already here? Why do we see Jesus talking about a different Father and calling calling Yahweh rather, the lying murderer from the Genesis, which is what he did? Why do we see this bizarre conversation with Pontius Pilate, where Pilate is saying, "Where are you from?" When told that he claims to be the Son of God? Why do we see Jesus talking about this divided kingdom? And maybe not quite as important, but right next to it, why doesn't Christianity talk about any of this? Christianity is designed to conceal all of this from us. And of course, this is a tiny portion, of course, right? We've been studying these things almost 10 years. We have hundreds and hundreds of hours of in-depth biblical study on these matters. Not surface level stuff, not apologetics type stuff, scholarly studies that really break down the text, that are looking at historical and cultural context. Now, what's funny here is the Christian will often say, you're taking things out of context. Yes. Yeah, they're right. I'm taking things out of the Christianity context. That's exactly right. Because it's made up. Because it's not real. Because it's a fantasy fiction story invented by the church fathers over hundreds of years, long after Jesus. When the word Christian is used in the New Testament, none of those people were followers of Christianity. The word Christianity wouldn't be used until the 2nd century. The idea of this Christianity system, religion, that eventually became Roman Catholicism, happened very slowly over time. It is a massive and grand departure from the words of Jesus. We have a divided kingdom, and the other side of that divided kingdom, Yahweh's side of the kingdom, has worked ferociously to cover up and conceal the truth of Jesus' own words all through the Gospels. This is why I teach like 95% from the Gospels, because Christianity doesn't. I posted on X a little while ago. I don't think I could quickly find the post. I might be able to find it. This is actually, I would love to read this out to you right now. If I could find this. I wonder if somebody could find the post that I made about Christianity's favorite Bible passages. I'm sure you won't have that much difficulty, and then drop it in the chat for me. So I posted this just maybe a few weeks ago, and I had AI go through major Bible resources like Zondervan and Bible Hub, and we're looking at all of the verses Christians quote, okay? And almost all of the passages that Christians quote, and we're looking at like, I think the top 100 verses that Christians quote, very few of them are actually from Jesus. The vast majority are from the rest of the New Testament. Then a slightly smaller section are from the Old Testament. And the percentage that were of actually quoting Jesus was getting vanishingly small. Maybe if someone can find that post and let me know, you can DM me or something. But I really would have liked to, let me just search for something else here. I found it. Okay, let me read this to you. I don't have a way to easily bring that up, but I want to bring it up. Hang on. This is worth it. This is really worth it, because this is very, very, very telling. Let me get that off for a second, and since I know how to find it now. You know, the reason this is so telling is because when you latest, there we go. Let's blow that up. Okay. This is shocking, really. posted this on December 8. Across the best large-scale data we have, Jesus' own words are quoted far less than everything else Christians quote. Bible Gateway's usage data for its 100 most read verses show that only a small minority come from the Gospels and thus from Jesus' direct teaching, while the majority of New Testament verses come from the epistles and a substantial portion of the total comes from the Old Testament. Comes from the Old Testament life verses, like those mentioned there. YouVersion's Verse of the Year and Top 10 lists reinforce this. Epistle texts such as Philippians, Romans, 2 Timothy, 1 Peter dominate global highlights, bookmarks, and shares, while only a couple of gospel verses, typically John 3:16 and Matthew 6:33, consistently appear near the very top. Pew's computational study of roughly 50,000 U.S. sermons shows that New Testament books are cited more often than Old Testament ones, yet the examples and themes they highlight lean heavily on doctrinal or ethical formulations rather than extended engagement with Jesus' own sayings. Taken together, these data sets indicate that contemporary Christian quoting behavior numerically sidelines Jesus' direct teaching in favor of Pauline sentences and a small cluster of comforting Old Testament lines. Why is that the case? Why? You think I rag on Christianity, the religion, not people, right? We're not talking about Christians. We're talking about Christianity, the religious system. That's why I talk about Christianity apologists rather than Christian apologists. I'm trying to move away from personifying it into any individual. There's a religious system that we're dealing with. Why does Christianity have so little interest in Jesus? I teach Jesus. That's why Christians who have been trained by Christianity don't like the things I teach. I teach Jesus, not Christianity. Such a big deal. Oh, all right, let's get into some more interesting stuff. We are here. Some of these things really kind of take my breath away. You know, they really, sometimes, you know, because I am my worst critic. I doubt myself all over the place all the time. I do not have a high level of confidence in the things I teach. I don't teach them because I have a high level of confidence. I teach them because they are the words of Jesus. And it's not that I don't have a high level of confidence because I don't have faith, hope, and trust in Jesus. It's because I am the doubting Thomas. I am always doubting what I am saying, what I am teaching. I watch my own studies and I'm picking them apart, and I don't want to teach error. That's why I don't teach Christianity. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's why I repented of Christianity. And no, it's not enough for us to say, no, but Christianity just means follower of Jesus. Christian, you might argue, means follower of Jesus, not Christianity. You've got to understand that the Christians in the New Testament were not followers of Christianity. Well, how do you know that? Because Christianity didn't exist and wouldn't exist for a long time later. It was developed over centuries and is still being developed to this day. Right? You leave Christianity, you follow Jesus. That's what I did. I left Christianity to follow Jesus. We are here. Where are we? We are here. Oh, Yahweh, the God of this world, spent 2,000 years consolidating this planet under his rule. Actually, it's much more than that. It's 3,400, depending on how you count. Whoops. There's different ways to count. Yahweh has been consolidating everything under his power. He wants a one world global government. All the stuff you see all around us, one world government, everyone sees it all coming together. We've seen it happening for decades now. That's Yahweh. Yahweh is the one behind it all. Right? And when that penny drops, everything around you will start to make an awful lot more sense. It's all Yahweh's behavior that we see all around us. He doesn't love people. He hates us. He didn't make us. Oh, he claims that he made us from dirt. Jesus made us, and he didn't make us from dirt. He made us in his image and his likeness. According to Genesis chapter 1, we are Elohim light, not dirt clods. Followers of Jesus are living under enemy rule. Those of us that love Jesus and follow Jesus and want to become more like Jesus and be Jesus to a hurting and broken world by bringing his love, his forgiveness, his message, his gospel to everyone around us, we are living in enemy territory. We are behind enemy lines. This is Yahweh's world. And if you say it's not, well, then you're calling Yahweh a liar, which he is, but you would be calling him that. Because he says it's his world. I own the world and everything in it. That's what Yahweh claims. And the consolidation towards a one world government, the beast system, I mean, it used to be pure fantasy. You know, people would mock and ridicule you. Oh, they're going to brand your hand. I think that's actually going to be a very legitimate, real thing. I have an idea of how that's going to play out. We might talk about that in sometime this year. I see the path to that perfectly, I think. And they're going to tell a story. I know what the story they're going to tell is. And every single person is going to have to be branded. Physically, visibly branded. And if you thought not wearing a mask during COVID was a big deal, whew, you try walking around without the brand on your hand, dude. People were murdered for not wearing masks, right? I'm thinking of that security guard at some shop somewhere. Guy comes in with a mask, pushes him outside, pulls his gun, and shoots him dead because he wasn't wearing a mask. We've seen what Yahweh's systems are capable of doing. We will be totally oppressed by Yahweh. I was going to say in the near future, but no, we're living through it right now. It has already begun. COVID was the big thing. Wasn't a test, it was the start. And it will continue, and it's going to get worse and worse. Ooh, the temperature is dropping. Okay, so that's where we're at now. Yahweh, the God of this world, runs the world. All these religious leaders, the Epstein stuff, I mean, all of it. A certain nation, all of it goes back to who? Who's the God of that nation? Yeah. How are we to live? To love one another. This is the hardest thing. You know, I'm an orphan. I was raised by the system. I wasn't raised by parents. I wasn't raised by anyone that loved me. And learning to love other people is something that is a journey, and you have to learn. And best if you're taught as a child. It's a lot easier as you get on in life. And you are following Jesus. You have to read those words of Jesus and see how he loved people. And not just pick on the verses, draw from those verses where he got in people's face, that is very rarely appropriate. What is 99% appropriate is you love on people. You love your enemies, right? Jesus said, you will be known by your love for one another. We cannot skip over these things. Following Jesus brings personal transformation. I sometimes delete tweets because I look at something that someone will randomly like something I wrote, 10 years ago. And I will just be like, oh, like, I can't believe I wrote that. I sure would not write anything like that today. And I delete it because I've repented. I have changed the way I think and act. I would never talk to anyone like that today. Following Jesus brings personal transformation. We will be known by our fruit. Now, none of us are perfect. Some of us have got the loving others thing down a lot better than others, usually because we were raised in an environment where that was just normal and we don't know any better except to love other people. And some of us were not, and it's harder for us, but following Jesus brings personal transformation. And if there is no personal transformation, well, that tells us something. And it's got to tell you something. And it doesn't matter how much of a bro you are, how much of a big burly bear man you are, we must love those around us, including our enemies. That's tough. I tell you, it's not easy for me. I prefer animals to humans. Many of us do, It's real tough. It's a real challenge. It's a real demonstration of whether you're developing in Jesus or not. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And every one of us needs to continue to chip away at the bad things in our lives, the way we mistreat people or treat people poorly, and become more and more and more like Jesus. He is the way. We need to be more like him. Oh, and by the way, you know what preceded Christianity? Yeah, the followers of Jesus that called themselves of the way. Of the way. They predate anyone called a Christian in the Bible, and of course they predate Christianity itself. So here are 5 questions that I talk about a lot, and these are the 5 questions that we need to go through in our Bibles to learn more about all of this that I'm teaching, and what the real Christmas story is all about is going to be answered by going through the Gospels with these 5 questions. Okay? And you can do the first part of the first chapter of Acts as well, where Jesus is leaving. And by the way, talking about that, when we read the first part of Acts, and we see the departure of Jesus, he's literally seconds, right? Literally seconds away from leaving. And what do his disciples ask him? Is now the time that you're going to restore the kingdom of Israel? Jesus, like, really? Really? 3 years? 3.5 years, and you still don't get it? And some of you are going to go off and write letters that are going to end up being part of a Bible, and you don't even get it now. You've spent all this time with me. Right? That's why we can't pretend the Bible is a special book like Christianity claims it is. Oh, it's wonderful, especially the Gospels. But we don't need to pretend it's something it's not to receive all of that goodness from it, right? So we go through the Gospels with these 5 questions. Here's the thing, it's a strange dichotomy. Very few people have ever done this. Those that have, it has changed their lives. People think I'm BSing them when I talk about how powerful this is. You're not learning from me. There's no doctrine here, right? There's not a single belief or doctrine in this list of questions, okay? What did Jesus say about himself, his Father, what he came to do, where he came from, what would soon take place? There is not a single belief there whatsoever. All it is go looking for these things. Find out for yourself what Jesus has to say about these 5 topics. 5 very important topics. If you actually do this, you will learn more about Jesus than a 4-year seminary graduate doing biblical studies. I am dead serious. To do all 4 Gospels and go through this will probably take you about a quarter, about 3 months, maybe 4 months. Unless you're going to, you got a lot of free time. But if you do this, buy a notepad just for this, right? And then go through the Gospels with these 5 questions and write everything down. Don't use a computer. Use a paper Bible, use a pen or pencil and paper. And it's far more visceral that way. Just get personal with the Bible. Go through the Gospels with these 5 questions. It will teach you the things Jesus wants you to know, not what Christianity wants you to know. Because they won't even teach you this stuff. Some of the stuff they don't even know about it to teach it to you, right? It's often not just that Christianity is ignoring a lot of this stuff. It's that Christianity has no awareness of these things. We can use AI to search back through all religious history, and the vast majority of that is digitized in all AI's training. Theological works, makes up a big chunk of AI training data, and there's not a lot that's left out. So if it was published, it's in AI training data, and we can go and ask it questions, and I find something in the text, and I will go to AI and say, hey, I found this in the text. Find somebody else who has ever talked about this in 2,000 years. And a lot of the time, nobody ever has. That's interesting. What's next? All right, now here it gets a little interesting, huh? The kingdom returns and final restoration. I guess that's spelled wrong. The kingdom returns. An alien invasion. The kingdom comes to earth. If they're not humans, if they didn't come from here, they're technically aliens. And that is how Yahweh and the governments of the world are going to position it. They're going to say, aliens are coming. Well, yeah, technically, by definition of the word alien, yes. That's why we call people that come across the American border or any country's border, we call them aliens. Whether they're coming legally or illegally, right? They're still aliens. That's the word we use. They're not from here. They're coming in from somewhere else. That makes them an alien. Okay? We are going to have an alien invasion. But they're going to paint it, you can see already in the Christian memes, talking about how aliens are demonic manifestations. This is what I mean by childish fantasy. That they'll make up stories like, oh, it's Project Bluebeam. They're going to put holographic images in the sky that look real but are just like laser lights or something. This is what I mean by childish fantasy. We are distracted by all of this silliness. And I mean childish not as a pejorative. It's infantile. It's the things that children think about, and yet some people don't really grow out of that and to think about things as rational, solid, mature human beings. And these stories are out there everywhere, right? You see them all over the place all the time. You've got Christians that are saying also that there will be a fake alien invasion to bring about a one world order. The kingdom is going to return, led by Jesus himself, and they are going to overthrow Yahweh and his one world government and set us all free. And it's going to be messy. It's going to be kinetic. It's going to be warfare. It's not going to be an easy ride. If we look at what Revelation is saying, and it's a very interesting book and nobody really understands it, I sure don't. But when we're looking at some of the death counts that are there, if they are accurate, about half of the world is either killed or maimed, incapacitated in some way. Half. That's a lot of people. Then life returns to normalcy, and we could add to this. And then there will be a what? A restoration of all things. What have I done here? And then what else? We'll have the resurrection from the dead. We'll have access to the fruit of the tree of life. We will be biologically immortal again, like we were back in the garden. And we are so close to being able to create life synthetically in the lab and at least extend the life of human beings. There's a lot of interesting people out there that are trying to live forever. Well, I can tell you how you can. You can just follow Jesus and put your faith and your hope and your trust in him. And he will give you access to fruit with nutrients that restore your body, and you will get to live forever. Not in some childish fantasy, non-physical heaven. When John is talking about heaven, what does he say? Right? Oh, I didn't put it in here. So the final restoration is in Revelation 22, and we see after we've lived here for about 1,000 years on this earth, we will be relocated. But first of all, we're going to be here for a long time. Things will return to normalcy. The infrastructure will still be here. We will still fly around. Maybe we will be upgraded from airplanes. We'll still have cars. We'll still have bikes, trains, and, petroleum. And when they first got here in the ancient text, it says that was one of the main reasons why they picked the landing site they did, because there was petroleum just coming up out of the ground, which they had good use for. We are going to just live here like normal people for a long time, under good management. Under Jesus' ultimate rule, you've got a benevolent dictator, someone who has the absolute final authority. He's a king, but he rules in favor of us. But it's going to be normal. It won't, look at what we have now. It's, compared to 100 years ago, there's nothing normal about this. It's going to feel totally normal. Okay? It's going to feel totally normal. Oh. So, okay. I think this is going to play out pretty soon. I don't think we're that far off. Israel is going to build a temple to Yahweh. They're going to start animal sacrifices, and they're going to summon the demon. And Yahweh will turn up, and he will take his seat in the temple, and he will declare himself God of the world. And how many Christians are going to fall for that? I would say almost all of them. Not all of them, but I would say probably higher than 90%. Which is why getting this message out to people is so important. We need the Christians to know that we were played. We don't hate you. We don't have anything against you. We just want you to know that we were deceived and we were delivered from that deception, and we can show you in the Bible this divided kingdom where you have two parties that are against each other, and one of them is Yahweh and one of them is Jesus, And Jesus has come to set us free from Yahweh and restore us to Abba Father's kingdom. All right? Eventually, humanity moves to heaven. And we can see from the description in Revelation 22 that it's a planet. John literally says it. I see a new heaven and a new earth. Now, there's different ways to interpret that, but it's a real physical planet, no matter which way you interpret it. Some people say, oh, it's a restoration of this planet. Possibly, but then still a planet. Okay? Access to the tree of life restored. So, what Yahweh deprived us from in the garden, Jesus restores us to when he returns. Okay? Summary. What is the Christmas story all about? Summary. There is an Elohim council, not a Trinity. Abba Father is Elyon, the Most High. This is a Hebrew word that means the Most High. Jesus and Yahweh are Abba's sons. They are both sons of Elyon, the Most High. Yahweh tried to overthrow his father. And here on earth, he told everyone he was successful at that, as we see in the Greek and Roman pantheons, because Zeus and Jupiter are Yahweh. You see the connection back to Pilate and how he knew all these things. It's all wrapped up together. Yahweh tried to overthrow his father. Yahweh was cast down to earth. Yahweh raised an army from the Hebrews. Yahweh steals, kills, and destroys for centuries. I probably should say millennia there. It hasn't stopped. Yahweh becomes the Elohim of this world through force. Yahweh agrees if anyone can fulfill his law, all humanity can go free, knowing no one will. That's the contract for humanity. We find that in Revelation 5 and the culmination in Revelation 11:15. Jesus came to free humanity from Yahweh by fully submitting to Yahweh and fulfilling his law. Now humanity is legally free. Jesus leaves to prepare a place for humanity. Yahweh replaces the gospel with another that makes him the Most High, Christianity. You are here. Yahweh's people rebuild his temple and the world worships Yahweh as the Most High. And why wouldn't you? If you don't know any of this already, and that happened, I know if it was 10 years prior to now and that happened, I would be going, because I was a big Yahweh guy. I never had the slight, you see people will say, oh, you just can't handle, Yahweh's justice and holiness and like, dude, you can look back through everything that I said up until about 9 years ago, and I never said a single bad word about Yahweh. My favorite worship song was Yahweh by Vineyard Music. I'm not going to sing it, but that I have never been opposed to Yahweh until Jesus removed the scales from my eyes, lifted the veil from my eyes. I at no point had a bad thought about Yahweh. I made all the same excuses and justifications that everybody else did. And people probably would have already found stuff because I have a lot of stuff online from the past. I used to teach on Yahweh. I mean, with love and adoration. I used to worship Yahweh. I never had any problem with Yahweh. I never sort of, I don't like what he's doing. Let me find some idea to, resolve No, that never happened. The veil was lifted from my eyes and I could see. Jesus and his Father return to physically free us. So this is the real Christmas story. Creation by Jesus and his Abba Father. Yahweh takes over and brings death. Jesus comes and fulfills Yahweh's legal system. Jesus restores humanity to Abba Father. Jesus comes and restores rule over earth. Jesus migrates humanity to heaven. Jesus chose us over Yahweh. Jesus chose you over his own brother. This is such a powerful story that Christianity doesn't even have anything that compare. When we go back to the original story that I read at the top, let's read that again. I'm sure it'll have a lot more punch this time. The traditional Christianity narrative describes a domestic transaction where a son satisfies his father's internal debt. This frames the cross as a scripted ritual. The whistleblower perspective reveals a much higher price and a far more sophisticated mission. Jesus did not merely fulfill a holy requirement. He executed a tactical infiltration into a hostile legal system run by a rebellious entity. By voluntarily submitting to a rigged law designed for human entrapment, he allowed the system to overreach and execute an innocent man. This act exposed the architect as a murderer and used the enemy's own legal machinery to execute the contract for humanity, setting us legally free. This transformed Jesus from a compliant victim into a master liberator who outmaneuvered a tyrant on his own turf. It replaces a passive religious tragedy with a high-stakes rescue mission where love is proven by the grit required to enter a cage in order to break the lock. What Jesus did for us is difficult to accept. He chose us over his own kind. He debased himself before his enemy for us, for you. The sacrifice Jesus made for you is so much greater than Christianity can even begin to tell you. Christianity doesn't have a clue. It is a childish fantasy story that has been designed to conceal the real Christmas story, the real gospel of the kingdom. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate all of my Founders Club supporters that are scrolling across the bottom of the screen. You can join them at Anderson Discoveries. We've gone a long time here. Thank you so very much for listening. I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.